This is the BBC.
Dear brothers and sisters, all are welcome here at the Confessions podcast, whether saint or sinner.
Well, hello, and welcome to another Confessions podcast here from your friends at Radio 2.
You're very good, yeah.
I was just trying avuncular. What do you think? That work?
Could you try it in a kind of voiceover from 1940s?
I don't do requests.
With a bow tie?
I'm not a performing monkey, you know.
Oh.
Give me a week to rehearse. Then I will be. Anyway, here comes another Confessions podcast then. Sister Bobby, brother Matt, everyone else sitting here ready to go with the highlights of the week. Dave's confession, in the hair tonight. Stuart's tale, who's zooming who. Dr. Phil's confession, love can't build a bridge. And another classic confession we've unearthed from the crypt and chosen by you. First, we start with Glyn's confession, Landing of Confusion.
Simon Mayo's Confessions podcast. Please be seated.
Dear Simon and your hopefully forgiving team, my story is set at a boys' school in Lincolnshire. Let's call it Bash Street Secondary Modern. It's the late 80s and the early 90s, and I believe I can now confess this story safely, as my old headmaster, Mr. Dyke, sadly passed away earlier this year, so cannot punish me or my friends. Interesting how a headmaster from all those years back, and still Glyn is thinking, he might reach me from there. Mr. Dyke was an old school headmaster, firm but fair, and everyone feared him and loved him in equal measure. Thankfully, the days of corporal punishment had long since passed when this incident took place, but Mr. Dyke had an index finger made of steel, and he would jab you in your ribs with every syllable as he shouted in his strong Yorkshire accent,
Yes, here it comes.
Hey up, go on.
I'm not going to do that because you know the rules. I'm not going to do it.
Okay.
Anyway, he would shout as he jabs me with his finger, "You boy, you're a toe rag!" By the way, Glyn, you spelt toe wrong. And if Mr. Dyke saw this, you get the finger in the ribs, definitely. Ours was a rough school, Father Simon. In fact, it was the roughest in the area. The only school we didn't argue and fight with was the local girls' school. This wasn't because they were girls, but because they made St. Trinians look like a convent. Our nemesis, however, was just down the road from us. The toffs and the brainiacs at the local grammar, St. Custard's.
Really? Oh, that's very funny.
Well,
oh no, of course it's from Thingy, isn't it?
It's from Back in the Jug Again, Nigel Molesworth.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we got Bash Street versus St. Custard's.
Yeah, well,
that's where we're placing this. On the morning of the event, myself and my two best friends, Wayne and Stuart, were on the school fields enjoying break and trying to avoid the fifth years because no one likes their head being shoved down the toilet after all, because that's what used to happen at every break. Well, it's Bash Street Secondary Modern.
Yeah, it sounds like it. That's
different
one way.
times.
You don't have to wash your hair soften.
After a while, we heard an unusual noise. We listened again, and it was definitely very unusual. It went like this. We looked around, and then we looked up, and we saw a large red and blue Wessex helicopter flying over the school and begin to circle after a couple of times. Anyway, then Stuart began to, do what? Well, in his head, anyway, he was doing exactly what air traffic controllers do and advised the pilot to come and land near the school in a field just over there, look. In reality, Stuart was waving his arms as though he was being attacked by a swarm of bees, but pointing to a patch of field. Being the smart and responsible one of our group, I decided that it was just a great idea and joined in, followed by Wayne, and not long after, the entire school, all pointing at the field. Hi, yes, there. Just a bit of harmless fun, we thought. That was until an arm came out of the cockpit with a thumbs up, and the helicopter circled for the last time and landed exactly where we had been pointing. At this point, Mr. Dyke burst through the school doors and made his way over to the helicopter at quite a speed, huffing and puffing as he ran. Crimson and flustered, Mr. Dyke was met by a burly man that, from our feeble peering positions, seemed to be preventing Mr. Dyke from getting any closer to the aircraft. Lots of shrugging and wild hand gestures followed, but this quickly changed to hands over his mouth from Mr. Dyke and then a somewhat submissive head-bowing posture. The muscly crew member stomped back into the aircraft, and shortly after, the helicopter took off as quickly as it had landed. Mr. Dyke, meanwhile, shuffled back into the school, looking pale and aghast. Not his usual boisterous, finger-pointing self at all, we thought. Clearly, something hugely embarrassing had occurred, and he weakly gestured and muttered for all the staff to follow him. Surprisingly, the event was not mentioned for the rest of the day, apart from hushed whispers between students shuffling through the corridors. Mainly at how Mr. Dyke had practically run away from the helicopter back into school. This was very, very unlike him. The next day we all piled into assembly, and Wayne, Stewart and I sat there, guiltily looking at our shoes. Mr. Dyke's voice boomed and rattled throughout the school hall as he demanded to know which toe rag, again spelt wrong, had started the pointing and directing the aircraft to land. There was complete silence, and thankfully for us, nobody seemed to know who had started it. They'd just seen everybody else do it, and so they joined in. Mr. Dyke's face set in a deep frown, accepting that no one was going to own up, and he solemnly began, "Boys, that's all of you boys, pay attention." From Yorkshire, remember? "I need you to understand the extent of the humiliation that you have brought on the school.
This is your head teacher voice, isn't it? Yeah.
This wasn't fun. This wasn't clever. Was it reckless? Yes, it was. Yes, it was, boys. It was reckless. Let me tell you that you hailed a helicopter, and it landed. And the helicopter you lot thought would be so funny to get involved in our school was carrying no other than His Royal Highness Prince Charles.
Hey.
The Prince of Wales, the Duke of Cornwall, the Duke of Rothesay. You hailed the actual heir to the throne, who landed in our field. Think he was expected? Was he expected? No, he wasn't." You see, Father Simon and the Ever Gracious Collective, I was riffing there just a little bit. Going off script.
Yeah.
Good.
It turns out that the Prince was on a visit to St Custard's down the road.
Ah, but he was.
However, the pilot had got a little confused, so when these helpful children had started guiding him, he followed their instructions. So I hereby plead for forgiveness for my friends and myself, not from Mr. Dyke, who I think after he calmed down quite liked the fact that we got one over the grammar school. I also don't seek forgiveness from the grammar school, nor from Prince Charles, who I'm sure would have had a much more enlightening time if he had stayed with us. However, I would like to apologise to the pilot, who, because of us, no doubt, got a right royal telling off. Which is probably quite likely if you think you land in completely the wrong place just because a bunch of kids are saying, "Hey, land here." That'd be a good thing. Anyway, that's Glyn's confession. Sister Bobby, what are you thinking at the moment?
Oh, well, I'm thinking actually it's nobody to blame, really. I was sitting there thinking it's the pilot, I understand. He's going to a school and he's not sure which school. Well, he's, he gets a rough idea where he's going. He's going to a school. He doesn't know that there are two...
You've got to have a rough idea. You've got to land properly.
Well, yeah, but like I said, it's kind of easy. From the pilot's point of view, I understand. I don't blame the pilot. I don't blame the headmaster. I don't blame I don't blame the children. I think they're just having fun. That's fine. It seems to me like a jape that actually there were no victims. I think it was fine. They might have wasted some fuel. No one was injured. Headmaster, actually, Mr. Dyke. I love Mr. Dyke. He sounded like he ran a really tight ship, but also had a sense of humour. So I'm going to say, Glyn, it's easy to forgive you because actually I forgive everybody. No one to blame.
What a pushover. Exciting times at Bash Street Secondary Modern. What do you think of Nigel?
Oh, well, I'm going to take issue with you there, Bobby, about Ironfinger Dyke. I think if anyone was reckless, it was him approaching a helicopter with the blades turning. Has anyone you've seen Apocalypse Now? You wouldn't do that.
True.
He did.
Very true.
I mean, absolutely. He'll be getting his surfboard out next and ramming the beach.
Oh,
I mean,
I say,
absolutely.
there you go,
So
yeah.
but there were three schools. There was the girls' schools. There were toughies. There was St Custard's and the Bash Street. So, I mean, the pilot, well, he wasn't to blame. But so you definitely weren't to blame, Glyn. And who wouldn't, a boy or girl, bring in a helicopter? Of course you would. That's what you put on this planet to do, aren't you? Aren't you?
I'll take your word on that, Matthew.
Yes, only Nige can get an Apocalypse Now reference into that. Superb, well done. Obviously we're going to forgive here because, the kids were just pointing at a field. You don't just land because a bunch of kids are telling you to pointing at a particular field. And helicopters, surely they've got sat-nav. Something the equivalent of sat-nav, even in the 80s. Come on. And how are they going to spot which school was the right school otherwise? No idea. So not adding a lot here. I am going to forgive.
The Confessions Podcast.
Dear Father Simon and the Galactic Justice Collective. Have that for the T-shirt. My confession dates back to the Black Country in the early 70s when I was 11 years old. I'd heard through the local grapevine that Tom Baker was opening a new branch of a big newsagent's in Dudley, and I was and still am a huge fan of Doctor Who. Clearly, this was an opportunity of a lifetime to meet my hero and a chance I was not going to pass up. However, this particular opening was on a Thursday lunchtime during term time, so with meticulous planning and infinite imagination that goes hand in hand with being 11, I decided to advise my teachers that I was going home for lunch. My mum, as usual, had given me a week's dinner money on the Monday, so I planned to use the cash as bus fare to get me to town and then to buy Tom's book. Stuart actually went without lunch or dinner, because it's dinner money, for Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, so he could save up for this. I got hold of a copy of the bus timetable and the times were perfect. The bus left at 12:32. The journey took 15 minutes. The return bus would leave 30 minutes later at 1 o'clock, back to school by 1:15, and a whole 15 minutes to spare before school resumed at 1:30. By my calculation, this would give me 15 minutes to buy the latest Doctor Who novel from the newsagents, get Tom's autograph and get back on the bus. Simple, ingenious and above all foolproof.
Yeah, what could possibly go wrong here?
The big day arrived and at 12:30 the school bell rang for lunch. I grabbed my coat and ran as fast as I could to the bus stop, arriving breathless just in time to see the bus pull away. This was not part of the plan. Luckily, I had a plan B. I knew that the bus did a circle of the local housing estate before heading into town. So if I was quick, I could run to the other side of the estate and get on the bus there. I arrived at the requisite stop. However, it was at this point I made my first mistake. The bus turned the corner, but for some reason, I was on the wrong side of the road. I pelted across the road with a shameful disregard for the Green Cross code and just made it in time to get on the bus. It was now 12:37, according to my digital watch, which I just got for Christmas, meaning I was not only on schedule, but I was actually ahead. Ha-ha! However, as I looked out of the window with a smug grin, I noticed we were actually going the wrong way.
Of course you were, because it was on the wrong side of the road.
Stop! I shouted. You're heading away from Dudley. Should have done the accent, decided not to again. The conductor looked me up and down and then informed me that A, I should be at school, B, I shouldn't be telling him how to do his job, and that C, this bus was in fact going to Wolverhampton. Along with some other choice language, I had no choice but to get off at the next stop, and I was now a mile further away from Dudley. In fact, I was now within plain sight of my house, but with less money, less time, and obviously the bus fare would now be higher. As luck would have it, the bus, the one actually going to Dudley, arrived and I jumped on board. Paid my fare for the second time, then ducked down behind the seat as I passed my school. But it looked like I was going to get there. I arrived in Dudley, ran the 100 yards to the newsagents, noticed that there was no queue and no crowd, simply a desk with a very familiar man sitting behind it. I grabbed a copy of Doctor Who and the Loch Ness Monster and went to the till to pay, but looking at the cover price of the book, realised I now didn't have enough money for both the book and my bus fare back to school. What to do? Eventually, I tearfully put the book back on the shelf and bought a notepad, leaving me my bus fare and a few pennies left over. Notebook in hand, I strode purposefully towards my hero, who I was delighted to see was actually even wearing the scarf. "Hello," he said. I hadn't really thought this through, because at this point nerves took over and I suddenly lost the power of rational thinking and indeed speech. "Hello, Mr. Baker," I mumbled. "And what's your name?" he asked in his deep, friendly, fruity voice.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
"What's your name?" For what seemed... It was just a deep, friendly voice. It wasn't really a Tom Baker impression. For what seemed like an eternity, I couldn't remember my name. So I just grinned inanely. Tim took a sip of tea. Even Tom took a sip of tea. I eventually remembered my name and told him. "And where do you live?" asked my hero. Quick as a flash, I nervously reeled off my house number, street, town, county and postcode. As you do when you're 11.
Of course.
Tom smiled. "You seem a little nervous," he said, stating the obvious. I just stared inanely. "Don't worry, I'm nervous too," he said, and winked, the Tom Baker wink. He then asked if I had a book for him to sign, and calmer now, I explained my whole story to him, telling him about the bus, my dinner money, and how I hadn't got the money left for a book. I must have been talking nervously for about 5 minutes. All the time, Tom smiled, nodding, and adding the occasional listening noise. After I had waffled my way through my entire life story, I nervously held out my notepad, which was visibly shaking with nerves, and asked if he would sign it. "Of course," he said, probably relieved that I'd just shut up at last. He took the book from my still shaking hand and opened it to the first page, and he wrote, "To Stuart, your friend, Tom Baker." He gave me the book back. I thanked him, and he reached out to shake my hand. I shook his hand, trembling with nerves. He smiled, thanked me for taking the time to come and see him. I thanked him again, ran for the bus with a huge grin on my face. The return bus journey was on the whole uneventful. I got back to school just in time, never let on to the teachers that I'd been away. When I got home that night, my mum said, "How was your lunch?" "Fine," I lied. "Strange thing is," says my mum, "I went to Dudley today. Tom Baker was opening the new newsagents. There was a kid in there, looked just like you. Of course, we both know you were at school." "That's right, Mum," I lied, and rushed off to my bedroom to avoid further questioning. Therefore, as you will see, Father Simon, forgiveness is needed not from my mum, who never mentioned that she knew it was me, nor do I need forgiveness from the bus driver, who was just downright rude.
No.
Nor from the teachers and dinner ladies who believed I was going home for lunch. I do, however, ask forgiveness from Tom Baker himself for having to endure my nervous ramblings, not letting him get a word in edgeways, and for me boring him to tears, yet he remained professional throughout. And finally, Father Simon, if you could not use my real name, just in case Mum is listening and really didn't know that it was me 40 years on. The thing is, some things, even though 40 years on, and Stuart is obviously a grown man, and his mum is still a grown woman, you just don't want to come clean. You just don't want it revealed that actually he bunked off school to go and see Tom Baker, who is about to be back as Doctor Who in that one-off episode, as you may well have read, Sister Bobby.
Stuart, I know it was the 70s, but you should never, ever, 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 ever bunk off school. And you should never go somewhere without your parents' permission.
He did
However,
say...
no, just a minute, let me finish. Stuart, if you were my boy, I'd be so proud of you. I thought you were amazing. I thought it was well thought out. Of course, slight mistakes you'll learn. What I'm really disappointed in is your mum and Tom Baker. Because Tom Baker should have bought you a book after you telling the whole story. I would have bought. I think he should have bought you a book. I'm
If you'd been
disappointed.
Doctor Who, yeah.
Yeah, he's just he's come all this way and he's.
Things the whole
Go
point
buy
is
him
to
a
go-
book.
yeah.
He doesn't need the money that much. But Tom Baker, I'm disappointed in you and your mum. Your mum went all that way and she didn't even buy you a book and get it signed by Tom Baker. So Stuart, you're forgiven. Tom Baker, you are not.
Tom's coming out of it.
Well, yes.
I think
he's a nice man,
It was a
but-
humorous and pleasant exchange.
I'm sure. Although I think I would argue Tom Baker probably needed to have a word with his agent at this point. He's opening a news agent? Really? I'm going to this town, I'm going to open a news agent. Great.
I think
I probably think that most of the people who are going to want my autograph are going to be school kids. When's it going to be? Oh, it's going to be in the middle of the school day, Tom. Brilliant. You're sacked.
It's all right, says Tom. They'll all bunk off school.
Clearly. Yeah, well, there was no queue because all the kids were in school. Makes perfect sense. So I am going to forgive because, I mean, obviously Stuart has done everything he can to meet his hero, and things have gone wrong by getting on the wrong bus. But in the end, he's got an amazing prize at the end of it, which is this notebook with the best wishes of Tom Baker. So everyone wins out of this, apart from Tom Baker's agent, who clearly made the wrong call in deciding to have him open a news agent in the middle of a school day.
Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
And thanks to Stuart for his bunking off school tale. Who's zooming who? No G and an apostrophe. Now, for those of you who don't listen to the show in the week, thanks. I mean, we do turn up every day.
Right, yeah.
Anyway, you miss out on the incredible hilarity that ensues in general, but you also miss out when we hear the reaction to the confessions from those who bothered to listen live, unlike you, okay? So this text came through in response to Stuart's confession. Forgiven, Simon, this is Tim in Godalming. Tom Baker gave my mum 2 of his cats when he moved and gave her a year's supply of cat food for both.
Did she want them? I'm assuming.
Yes, have my cats.
So we had lots of Tom Baker stories, which was great. Still to come on this week's podcast, I try out another one of my famous accents. What do you think I'm aiming for here? Tell us about your favourite hobby, as detailed here in the paper I have in front of me.
It's French.
I think that's clearly German.
They're in front of me. Oh, yes.
Oh, I think... Oh, well... Yeah, it all blurs after a while.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's that time again where we peer upon the parish notice board, see what delights it holds for us this week. Anyway, the post bag is a complete mixed bag as ever. Bobby's got something which she's now going to perform for you.
Yeah, Lee Sims tweeted to say, "Me and my family are moving back to the UK from Dubai. My 6-year-old daughter was promised an electric car for her Christmas present as a welcome home gesture."
An electric car for a 6-year-old?
Well, the thing is, I think this is a sit and ride car, like the old-fashioned pedal cars. cars and not a remote control car because her main criteria, listen to this, is not the colour or the model, or the size. It has to have a radio and an MP3 so she can listen to Confessions
Absolutely.
in her electric car because she's obsessed by them on the podcast.
Thank you, Lee. Bringing your children up well. Matt, what have you got there?
So Richard at the gym in Essex emailed in to say, I was catching up on the Confessions podcast on the elliptical trainer in the gym, mostly to cover up the noise of the rather Neanderthal man pumping iron and sounding like a dying moose.
Well, we've all done that.
Yep. When I came to the non-compliant confessions, specifically the lady who passed wind in her car, causing her young daughter to vomit.
Oh, yes, that was a moment.
Very good. I was laughing so much that I fell off the machine. Members gathered round in a state of concern, mostly confused by the colour I turned due to a lack of oxygen from laughing so much and the tears running down my face. No harm done, and I'm back on the machine, but for the moment I'll stick with music and keep Confessions until I'm safely sat down.
That was one of those confessions where it was so completely horrible.
Yeah, we could never have done that.
But also true, so therefore it doesn't get into the live show. So Simon, to read this next bit.
Stage directions now.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
If you're a regular... It's because I make the script sing.
Yeah, it does. Leaps off the page.
If you're a regular listener to the podcast, you might remember Confused Joan, who's been in touch a few times. Well, she's emailed again, and this time mainly for Matt's benefit.
Okay.
Hello, yes, it's me. I'm back. Now, Father Simon, Perfect Bobby and Matt the Laugh, the blacklisted confessions are actually my favourite. Regarding the one a few weeks ago about a pig getting drunk on 151 proof rum, I can confirm to Matt that it does exist, as I have a bottle. So here is proof, if you'll excuse the pun.
Oh, it's just a
Wow.
picture.
Oh, so it's a picture of
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
proof.
well, she's not sending
Right.
you rum in the post,
okay.
is she?
Well, I was excited for a moment then. 151 proof.
Tortuga, 151 proof rum from the Cayman Islands. I mean, 75.15% alcohol by volume.
I can strip wallpaper with that.
There's an image at the bottom. Are those slices of tomato?
I think they're coins, aren't
They're
they?
okay.
either coins, licorice comfits,
Oh, yeah. Pontefract cakes.
or dog poo. It's
Yes.
difficult to say
Yeah.
from here. But anyway, thanks very much, Steve, for the photograph. And thank you very much, Steve, for getting back in touch. Confused Joan. An honourable mention now for Amy and her son Sam, who emailed to say, my son Sam and I listen to your podcast every week. Sam's 10 and has been receiving treatment for leukemia for 2 years. We always listen on a Monday night during our drive home after a long day at the hospital, and we love it. It always cheers Sam up after a tough day. So, Sam, we'll dedicate the entire podcast to you, all right? So, hopefully this is making you feel a little bit perkier. But this is the bit, I'm not sure at the age of 10 whether you might want to listen to this next bit, but clearly he does.
Yes, he does.
Because the more we tell you what's not acceptable for confessions, the more, for some reason, you just keep sending them in. The following tales not only fail to get forgiveness, but they also don't get a proper airing because they're so downright bad. That includes you, Paul, for your tale about playing fire starter in the woods with so much petrol that you ended up setting fire to the section of the river.
What? You set fire to the river?
Just as a man in a canal boat came round the bend, like a scene from Apocalypse Now or The Deer Hunter, says Paul. No, it's obviously
not on.
Not getting
No,
on.
no.
But an interesting.
Yes.
Interesting. As soon as you get to the word fire starter, it's not going to make it on. Caroline, your story about you being sick, not clearing it up properly, the cat finding it.
No. Don't say it.
Obviously.
Yes, they do, don't
It
they?
involves double sickness. Anyway. Only here can we indulge in this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Somehow your brother having to clean it up. How come your brother cleans it up,
Yeah.
Caroline?
Clean up your own sick and get sick. Surely.
If you had a dog.
And the dog's being sick as well.
What's the dog
No.
got to do with it?
Anyone with a dog now is knowing what I'm not going to say out loud.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you give the...
What?
make the dog eat the sick?
No, they don't make it. They just go
Do
in
it
there.
anyway?
Yeah.
Oh, right. There you go.
Anyway,
That's
no,
the
I've
point,
really
whole point of
lowered
having
the
a dog.
tone.
Do they do
I
that?
feel I've taken it to a level that we didn't need to go. I can see the producer just going, Bobby, stop it.
On a similar theme, Alfie, your story about sitting at the teacher's table in the school canteen, suddenly feeling unwell and unwittingly starting a game of vomit dominoes.
It's all about vomit. Brilliant. Brilliant. Yes.
It's not getting on. So
Vomit
what?
Dominoes.
Quite why you said it? Presumably, it's because you thought of the term
Yeah.
vomit dominoes.
Yeah, yeah.
Vom-dom, as we're calling it now. Look out! It's. By the way, there's a new category of bad confessions. Do you get sent them? It's when the producer's read one that he thinks is interesting, but he isn't going to even make it to this.
Oh,
point.
really? We've got one, that one. Oh, that bad.
yes.
I'm going to forward it to you.
Yeah.
Could we take a picture of your face? And then
Your
we'll put
face.
that and your mum's face. We'll put that on the internet, and that'll be the one that we can't even put into the bad confessions.
That
bit.
could be my new Radio 2 promo photo. couldn't it? Anyway, and Sally's confession about how she nearly poisoned half a dozen of her friends when making steak on holiday is also not forgiven. Just saying... Excuse me. I'm reenacting what happened.
Yeah.
But just saying nobody died does not actually get you a pass, especially as you accidentally substituted salt with carpet freshener.
What?
Okay, so absolutely...
Well, if you
not.
put the freshness back, maybe.
Mitigating circumstances, nobody died. Not very good,
Nobody
Your Honour.
died.
If you've got something a little bit more family-friendly, remember this goes out around about 5:40, so it's tea time for a lot of people. You can email confessions@bbc.co.uk. And even if it's not, you can send it anyway. Because who knows which of the debauched categories it's going to go into.
Indeed.
Just drinking some of Nigel's hot cordial.
Very sharp at the back of the throat.
If you have something, albeit more family-friendly to share, it's an email, please, confessions@bbc.co.uk. Even if it's not, send it anyway, and we'll give it to Bobby because she dines out on them. A new notice has appeared on the notice board, covered in tinsel and a flashing light or two. As you know, it's the 1st of December.
Is
and
it?
It is.
Yes.
Let me just check the calendar.
Is it the first day of winter?
Yeah.
It
right.
is. It actually is. Oh, you changed your
Oh,
tune.
hang on. No, I meant no. No, it's not. It's obviously been
The
winter since
meteorological
the-
calendar
Yeah.
doesn't have it till the 21st.
Well, that's what the meteorological calendar can do.
Anyway, it's winter. Christmas is on its way, finally, and you can now eat a mince pie without feeling bad. Due to a numbers mix-up in the marketing department, we have a few of our fabulous drive time car stickers going spare, which is a way of saying we made too many. So getting into the Christmas spirit, we will generously send you a sticker. This is instead of a... Nobody wants radios anymore. Nobody wants a DAB radio. They are so last year. A nice sticker, on the other hand. So, we will send it to you if you're the first to tweet the end of the podcast code word. If you can get another member of your family to subscribe to the podcast, obviously photographic proof will be needed.
Yes.
And sent to confessions@bbc.co.uk. And you send us money. No, sorry. Send us some merely mediocre praise or constructive criticism. All these 5-star reviews are really going to... No, actually, that's rubbish. Send us another 5-star review. That'll be lovely. Back to this week's confessions. Time to revisit Dave's confession in the hair tonight.
The Confessions Podcast.
Dear Father Simon and the Mayonettes, that's you.
What?
That's great. I love that.
That's not sticking.
I'm going to have that.
No.
I'm
The
gonna have
mayonnaise.
a T-shirt.
I love that.
I'll have 2 T-shirts. It was the summer of 1977, says Dave, and I was a 17-year-old member of the local karate club. And I have to tell you something of a leading light, having just gained the lofty rank of a brown belt. I also had a matching set of dark brown locks which hung fashionably down to my shoulders. I fancied myself as something of a ladies' man, and it was obvious that some of the young ladies at the club found me really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Look, there goes Dave,
With his locks.
they would say. One in particular, a pretty 18-year-old greenbelt, we will call her Susan, almost certainly changed, caught my eye, and when her mum used to turn up to collect her, at 18? Anyway, I always took the opportunity to show off a little, while Susan stared admiringly at me. Whether she was admiring my hair or my general movement, or maybe both, it's difficult to say. Eventually, I summoned up enough courage to ask her out, and she said yes. As my parents were going out for the evening the following week, I invited her round to my house for some nibbles to watch a movie, and Susan agreed.
Yes, he did.
How about that?
Good
When
news.
was this? Is this the
1977.
1970s?
1970.
Yes, of course.
1977. Okay.
Yeah.
The great day came when Susan was due to come round. After getting rid of my parents with a cheery, "Bye then, don't rush home, I'm going to be fine," I showered and sprayed myself liberally with high karate
Of course.
deodorant. Everyone at the karate club must have smelt exactly the same.
Yeah.
Looking in the mirror, I decided to trim my lovely locks with a device I'd bought, which was popular at the time. It was basically a razor blade sandwiched between two combs. Makes it sound like an offensive weapon rather than a hairstyle. This is perfect for National Hairdressing Awards
Of
night.
course it is,
isn't it?
yeah.
It was meant to take a small length of the curls off. I selected the setting for 1/4 of an inch and set about my Donny Osmond lookalike locks.
This is so going wrong, isn't it?
All was well until, in a rush of youthful exuberance, I dug in a little bit too hard on the top front bit of my head. I think that's called your forehead.
Dug in on
Into your fringe.
Yeah,
head.
with the razor blade. Horror of horrors, I was left holding a fistful of hair and was staring at a shiny bald patch of pale skin, about 2 inches square with a little bit of blood.
Oh, no.
In a blind panic, I realised that this was going to scupper any notions I had of a romantic evening in with Susan, the Greenbelt, and with shaky hands I attempted a Bobby Charlton comb-over. It made absolutely no difference at all, and I still looked like a Shaolin monk from the Kung Fu TV series, which was popular at the time.
Yes,
He's really
it
into the
was.
martial arts thing here. Then I had a brilliantly simple idea. I went downstairs and dug out a tin of black shoe polish and quickly rubbed quite a lot over the offending area. It stung just a little. A quick adjustment of the surrounding follicles, and with the bathroom lights switched off, it looked completely normal again. The evening was still on. Check me out with my brown belt moves. With 20 minutes to go before Susan was due to arrive, I switched off and dimmed as many lights as I could, and smelling slightly over-deodorized, I waited Susan's arrival. On time, Susan duly arrived, and after waving a cheery goodbye to her mum... Remember, Susan is 18, and her mum is taking her to this guy's house and driving her to the karate lesson. I think Susan has her mum over a barrel. That's what I think.
Right.
What is
I
going
think
on?
it's quite right. I think that
that
should
quite
happen.
right?
If you're walking out together, yeah. You're,
Okay.
Walking
Anyway,
out
so
together.
Susan duly arrived. After waving a cheery goodbye to her mum, who dropped her off, I guided her into the front room. It's a bit dark in here, Susan says.
Yeah.
I know it's romantic, I replied. Setting up the Betamax recorder with a copy of
Fabulous.
Enter the Dragon, we settled on the sofa. And all went well. Nibbles were nibbled, Bruce Lee battered his enemies, and Susan and I snuggled. I'm just going to
Yes, let's
skip that next bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we were snuggling. Eventually, it was time for Susan to go home, and I rang for a taxi. The taxi arrived, and as I escorted her to the front door, the light from the lamp outside revealed the awful truth. Where our romantic entanglement had gone a bit overboard, Susan's face and neck were now covered in black shoe polish.
Oh, no.
She looked like Bruce Lee had used her for a warm-up fight or a commando on battle manoeuvres. What a state! I quickly jumped in front of the hallway mirror so she couldn't see herself. Thanks for a lovely evening, Susan said, her two eyes sparkling like a pair of diamonds on a black velvet pillow. Dave, suddenly he's gone Mills and Boon.
He has.
Sparkling like a pair of diamonds on a black velvet pillow. Anyway, yeah, it was great. Let's do it again really soon, I mumbled, almost pushing her out of the door. Susan left, and I quickly bolted the door firmly shut, in case she broke, back in.
In case.
Let me in, I need a tissue. Father Simon,
What for?
to wipe this
Oh,
stuff
I
off
see.
my
Off.
face.
Yeah, your face.
Your mum's face. Anyway, Father Simon asked for forgiveness from Susan, who after 40 years must still be wondering where the shoe polish came from. From the taxi driver who probably thought I was a teenage homicidal maniac. And finally from Susan's poor mother, who probably had nightmares wondering what had happened to her lovely daughter, who she drove everywhere. And then dropped her off at a house with someone who wore boot polish to cover the gap in his hair. Took 2 months for a reasonable covering of hair to help me forget, and whilst I'm still practising karate after all these years, my nickname at the club isn't Killer or Destroyer, it's Cherry Blossom. Isn't that nice? So Dave Cherry Blossom in Harrogate. It's not, shoe polish is just never going to be a good thing, but that hair device, that hair cutting device with two combs with a blade in between the two, probably TV advertised, don't you think?
Yes.
And some celebrity endorsed it. Anyway, what do you say, Sister Bobby, with that
Oh,
one?
it's 1977. Did they have Betamax
Yeah.
recorders back then?
Probably.
Wow, I thought we only had a kind of 3-button TV back then. So that was quite something, wasn't it? Really, they must have been a posh house.
I think you've gone slightly. I don't think that's the heart. I don't think the Betamax recorder is the heart of this tale.
I know, I've gone off on a tangent, so apologies. But what's really sad about this is you thought you were so suave. You know, you got a girl back to your place, got her into the house.
High karate.
Yeah. Got close and all that. The thing is, why didn't she notice? It smells. Boot polish smells. Surely,
does actually, doesn't it?
When she had her head buried in his fringe, then she should have, maybe she'd have smelt it. You know.
And anyway, what's she doing? What's she doing?
What? Go on. Go on, please.
Anyway.
She's wiping her cheeks on his head.
Yes.
What's going on there?
And she probably got out. Anyway, moving on. The thing is, if he'd have just told her, they'd have probably had just an even better date. Instead of trying to pretend to be Mr. Suave, he should have said, look what I've done. And she'd have loved it, because we've all, cut our fringe too short. I'm sure. Not all, but most, maybe. Some,
No.
me.
Anyway, so
therefore forgiven. I can't remember.
Okay.
Even I sound like Matt
Yes.
now.
Yes.
What was the
Forgiven.
question? Forgiven.
Brilliant.
Yes.
That's why it's so good. I think the reason why she can't smell the boot polish is because he's been doused in high karate.
That's true.
And also, fair play to him for only using things and watching things that have got some kind of karate involvement. So he's
It's a
only
bit
watching
obsessive.
Monkey, Enter the Dragon, and wearing high karate. Good for you, Dave. I'm going to say forgiven because, we all, when going through the vagaries of first encounters, we do things
Courting.
that we're courting and stepping out. We all do things that maybe in the cold light of day don't seem
Like what?
Like what?
I have no
Tell
idea.
us.
But obviously not. I mean, wearing boot polish on your head appears to be a step too far.
Yes.
But I think still well done for getting through the night. And yes. And what was she doing it with on her face? Who knows? But a lovely night had by all.
So therefore,
Forgiven.
This is the place where penitents seek our pardon for their sins. Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
dear Father Simon and the pardoning purveyors of penitence, my confession goes back about 8 years to a time when I had recently moved to Frankfurt to live with my German girlfriend. Now, that lady is no longer my girlfriend. Not an amicable break, I can tell you. She is not central to this confession and has no interest in British radio, so we can safely say she won't be listening. But you never know. If you're German and you went out with Dr. Phil, this could be about you, loosely. You see, this confession actually relates to the older sister of my ex. Let's call her Dagmar, who was and indeed is a very successful architect in Berlin.
Ooh.
Now, Dagmar is quite a likeable lady if we set aside her domineering, patronising and self-centred behaviour.
Great.
It's fair to say these families went their separate ways.
Yeah.
And at the time of these events, she was just completing a project, which we're calling Ein großer Kaiser, which means big cheese, on a major shopping and entertainment complex in central Berlin. Okay, are we painting the picture?
Yes, yes.
To follow on from this achievement, Dagmar had decided to apply for a top job in a major international development company, also headquartered in Berlin. She's a lady who speaks and writes pretty good English, but it was not uncommon for her to consult me on the finer points of the English language, the minutiae of grammar, the correct choice of the vernacular, and the joys of the split infinitive. I'm sure you get the picture. So it was no great surprise to me when Dagmar called to ask me whether I would review her CV before she submitted it with her application. Naturally, I was happy to help, and after a short discussion, we agreed that rather than using the track changes function in a popular word processing program, which drives me crazy, I should simply make any changes directly into the final document. When it arrived, the CV was, of course, hugely impressive, and the grammar was also impressively accurate. I made a few small corrections, and then, just before hitting the send button, for reasons that I can neither remember nor explain, I added 2 extra words. Just two, Father Simon,
Yeah,
that's
just
all
2.
it was.
That is
What
fine.
difference could 2 words make to a job
Make any.
application?
Surely not.
And honestly, I'm pretty certain I told Dagmar to check it carefully to make sure she was happy with my changes. Anyway, having sent it, I forgot all about the CV and got on with my life. So it was something of a surprise when about 1 month later, Dagmar called me in a state of agitation. Apparently, she'd just come out of the interview and it had gone beautifully. Vorsprung durch Technik, one might almost say, until the very final question. At that point, the chief interrogator pointed his finger at 2 words that he'd highlighted in the personal interests and hobbies section at the very end of the CV. And then Dr. Phil says, "Cue your best German accent, Father Simon."
Yes, no, it demands the German accent.
I
Yes.
think I'm allowed to do this
Really?
one.
Good.
And so, he said.
That's not even
Is
it,
those
yeah?
the 2 words?
No, they're not the 2 words.
No.
This is very interesting indeed, Dagmar. Can I call you Dagmar? Yes, you can call me Dagmar. So, tell us about your favourite hobby.
Oh, this is great.
I'm sorry, says Dagmar. Tell us about your favourite hobby as detailed here in the paper I have in front of me.
It's French. We're going to French. Brilliant. Yeah, go on.
It's all one continent.
Yes, it is.
We're all
We're together
not.
now.
Well, we're not.
No, we're not.
Steady. So, Frau Dagmar says, she was understandably floundering as she didn't actually have a favourite hobby. I'm sorry, she says, my favourite hobby? Yes, says the chief interrogator. It says here your favourite hobby is ferret breeding. The breeding of
The ferrets.
Defrechen.
Defrection.
Plural for ferrets, I think. Apparently the interview then ended in something of a chaotic manner, and Dagmar was, for once in her lifetime, utterly speechless. Well, Father Simon, she may have been lost for words in the interview, but on the telephone to me straight afterwards, she had certainly rediscovered her vocabulary. I was suddenly learning all sorts of phrases that would be no use at all to me in a Frankfurt business meeting. Now, in fairness to Dagmar, it turns out that she had actually no idea what a ferret even was. Just a reminder, Frechen in German, just in case you're ever in a tight spot. So I can who knows, if you're visiting Germany, who knows when you're going to need the word for ferret. So I can certainly understand her agitation, but sadly it turned out Dagmar was not appointed to this esteemed position within a top global company. We never did find out exactly the reason why. So my dearly beloved gathering, I come to ask forgiveness, not from my ex, who spent the following weeks telling me at great length her views on my misdemeanour, or indeed from Dagmar herself, who subsequently established her own company and has since been responsible for many impressive erections across the great city of Berlin. Plus, as I previously mentioned, she was domineering, patronising and self-centred. I didn't think any of this was going to get through. I do seek forgiveness from the ferret breeders the world over in case my foolish act has brought them into any form of professional dispute. Interesting tale. The CV is a very interesting area for confessions, I think. Thank you, Dr. Phil, for that. What do you say, Sister Bobby?
Loved it. I wrote down 2 possibilities for the 2 words, which I shared with, and they are way off.
Well, I don't
Yes,
suppose anyone guessed ferret breeding.
I thought he might have just put "love you" on the bottom, as a funny kind of throwaway.
Oh, I see.
But so his was much more inventive, so that was impressive. Could have been worse, couldn't it, for 2 words?
Love you would have been quite funny,
Love
though.
you. Yeah, it would have been. That's what I thought. It was safe, harmless. Dr. Phil, I can't forgive you. Because this was about work. She asked you for help, quite honestly. And whether you liked her or not, she actually genuinely asked for you for your help. And how would you feel if you'd needed her help? She might have been all those things, but in this situation, she came to you for your expertise. Dr. Phil, you are not forgiven.
But Frau Dagmar has clearly done pretty well for herself in spite of
I
everything.
am definitely going to forgive, and here is why. There are 2 reasons why. Number 1, Frau Dagmar was after a free translation service. Try paying for the service you require. If you're going to get it for free, then better double check.
Well, those ones on the internet, they're all very
Sponging off
accurate.
your sister's boyfriend just to be able to get your CV looking nice. Not on. Second thing is this firm using the. Does anyone still ask for? Do you have any hobbies or pastimes? None of us have got hobbies or pastimes anymore. We haven't got the time. That's why I'm coming for this job. If I didn't want, I've got hobbies or pastimes. I don't need your job. It's like what's your greatest weakness? I have a low tolerance for stupid questions from people like you.
See how that goes down?
Yes, that
In
exactly
an
goes down
interview.
very well. So I'm going to forgive because the company didn't need her, and she wanted something for nothing.
Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
Dr. Phil's confession, love can't build a bridge, which prompted this reaction on the people's verdict. Forgiven, why didn't Dagmar just laugh it off in the interview? A spot of light-hearted ferret breeding might have cheered her up a bit, the freeloader. Matt and Harrogate.
That sort of diminished towards the end, didn't
I
it?
think so. And so thanks very much, Steve, for that. And that concludes this week's batch of confessions. Maybe it's inspired you to send in your own dark secret. Here's the email, confessions@bbc.co.uk. But before we go, another treat from the Confessions Crypt. We've had so many requests since we relaunched the podcast for past Christmas confessions. And as it is now December, we thought we'd completely give in. Here's the first one, as requested by Christopher Wright, Liz Street, Thomas Valuet-Draper, Elisa, Keith Beebe and Robert Clack, who sent in this email. Dear Simon, this confession may be best played closer to Christmas and is one that literally had me crying with laughter. At a school nativity, I think a lot of people know what's coming, the confessor found himself as a prompt for the diva star girl who had forgotten the baby's name.
Yeah.
Without giving it away, let's just say he wasn't the Messiah, but he was a very naughty boy. Just for everybody else then, here is our first Christmas Crypt confession.
The Confessions Podcast.
Dear Father Simon and the amusingly inconsistent collective. Nicely spotted. A recent 3-word texter to the show reminded me of this until now untold confession, recounting the consequences of nativity plays, an unforgivable breach of childhood trust, and the actions of a man pushed to and beyond the edge. Those 3 words for your 3-worder were nativity play disaster. And back in 2007, I was already a weary veteran of the primary school nativity play. You know the sort of thing, 100 small confused kids milling around in hastily painted cardboard outfits, scenery moving like an early series of Crossroads, and sufficient moral messages for even a reasonable man to be surreptitiously reaching for the hip flask. My luck was to be imperfectly placed somewhere close to the front, as befitting the husband of a school governor, where I could hear desperately excited children belting out classic nativity numbers with little interest in what the actual words might be, or even the tune. Kids of that age can't really carry a tune, but they can certainly take it outside and give it a good kicking. An impression may be forming that the annual pilgrimage to a damp village hall for an hour of forced bonhomie, with absolutely no prospect of a free bar, was not my favourite thing, and you'd be right. But at least some of this was instigated by the perennial spectacle of our next-door neighbour's daughter giving it the full Celine, as my wife accurately called it. This precocious child divaed all over the stage all of the time, taking all of the best parts, sometimes at the same time. Some context here. Lovely as our neighbours were, they were the wiki citation of pushy parents. Their 2 offspring really had to be the best of everything. You may also detect the slightest note of bitterness here as well. Not really, but it did get a bit wearing, especially as the school mafia, and anyone who's been involved with the PTA and Governor's Circle of Truth will know exactly what I'm talking about, was run with an iron hand by Lottie's mum. And strangely, her daughter would always get the choicest parts with the greatest stage time.
Controversial.
It is very controversial already. Let me tell you, it's the only nativity play that involved one participant getting about 9 costume changes and having her own changing room. Not our kids, though. They were generally and cruelly typecast with the minor parts. One of those parts being the back end of the Christmas donkey. The other one was generally some largely forgotten mouse or monkey whose sole role appeared to be falling off the stage. So here we are at Christmas 2007. I arrive, rafishly late, to find Lottie's dad filming the director's cut from a tripod-based camera mounted in the main aisle, and her mum backstage managing the costume changes and keeping the ugly kids out of shot. I apologised my way to a seat next...
Keeping the ugly kids out of shot.
Yes.
Well done.
Well, I've all met parents like this. I apologised my way to a seat next to my wife, dumping myself into a too small chair and wondering out loud if anyone knew how the play ended. Sharp and entirely deserved dig in the ribs from the missus hardly dulled the pain of young Lottie striking a statuesque pose stage front and murdering the opening lines to Away in a Manger. Then I heard a sound, possibly the sound of one of my children falling off the stage, signalling the crux of our little movie. Kings had been heard, wise men followed stars, indoors knocked at, fingers pointing at outside sheds, and a wobbly crib pushed unsteadily onto the stage. On came Lottie, dressed as the kind of angel who may have fallen into a bowl of chocolate, all bright-eyed and significantly trailed. You see, this wasn't the first time I'd been privileged to witness the final scene. Last time round, the neighbours, Lottie needed almost no encouragement to robustly recite the lines introducing the cribbed child to the masses. She looked thrilled when I complimented her on a perfect performance, and she clearly thought of me as a friend. a mistake, as it would turn out. So I knew exactly what was coming as she sucked big air into her lungs, and with a look of genuine joy, even I had by this time warmed to the whole thing and was especially looking forward to what was coming next, began reciting her lines. Behold, she grabbed swaddling wrapped doll from the crib, behold the bringer of light, the ruler of the world, God's son on earth, behold. And then nothing. Just a little kid in the lights with stage fright having forgotten her lines. Or one line, or in this case, one word. But quite an important one. She was one Jesus from getting it done, but instead just stared at a couple of 100 parents with a frightened O of her mouth. She'd forgotten the name of the baby Jesus. She desperately searched for a friendly face. Mum backstage, probably on the phone to her agent. Dad, method acting the cinematographer in the aisle some way back in the dark. She was lost. The silence stretched. The audience waited. And then she finally located that friendly face, so desperately needed at this time of crisis. Good old Mark, the very man who complimented her so effusively only a few days ago. She beseeched me with a look of trust and need, and I may have nodded slightly in reply. Reinvigorated now, she backstepped a half-line and bellowed, "Behold!" Then looked at me, confident that I'd give her the word. I gave her a word, all right. I whispered, "Bawaiian."
I thought it
Well,
might.
she didn't whisper it. "Bawaiian!" Rang round the hall like bells ringing out on Christmas Day, as did the laughter echoing back from most of the parents. Her face crumpled through confusion to horror as the laughter rose to a raucous crescendo. Careful use of the word most back there. At least 3 people didn't seem terribly amused. 2 were her parents, now consoling her with heartfelt messages of support and sticky chocolate, and my wife, who I dared not look at. But I knew she was looking at me. I do have a bit of a history of looking for a cheap laugh without considering the consequences, so was pretty much the prime suspect, even if she hadn't actually witnessed my misdemeanour. Obviously, I admitted nothing. I've absolutely no idea why Laura didn't grasp me up, but she never did. So I don't ask forgiveness of the parents who frankly learned an important lesson about the line between pushiness and pretension, nor from the other kids who for weeks afterwards would run around the playground reenacting the final scene and screeching, "Bawaiian!" Or from my wife, to whom I've had to apologise so many times for my inappropriate behaviour. A public apology would offer nothing new. But I obviously have to ask forgiveness from Lottie, who deserves something better in her time of great need than a man looking for a cheap laugh and some natural justice. I can only hope the next man she chooses is far more trustworthy and morally upstanding than me. Well, you don't want to have someone like Mark to trust on. You're looking out there, you want someone just to tell you the word that you're looking for, and it's not Bawaiian.
That is a brilliant confession. That was one of the funniest ones we've ever had. Beautifully written, just hysterical.
I took out about
Beautifully read, of course.
Yes, thank you.
Beautifully read as well.
I took out about 7 pages, I have to tell you.
The thing is, I mean, Mark, I think he's telling himself it was meant to be a joke, but actually, what was he motivated by? Jealousy.
Yes.
And it's not a very pretty
And
trait,
revenge.
is it? And revenge. And he's an adult, Lottie's a child. I mean, OK, Lottie's chosen for all the best parts, but it's not her fault, it's her parents' fault for being very pushy. So I think...
Yeah, wrong target, wasn't it? It's the
Wrong target,
yeah.
exactly. So I think Lottie suffered needlessly, and I'm not forgiving you.
OK, I think that's an interesting answer. Let's see what Novice Nigel makes of that.
Oh, gosh, I've been vacillating there. But I think that in 25 years she'll have a comeback and do that very scene again, and will do brilliantly as well. I mean, there is an old adage that you must die quite a few times on stage to succeed as an actor. And on that basis...
Say that as if you know.
Well...
It is, but having said that, it's a bit rum to forget the name of Jesus in the Nativity play, isn't it?
Has it...
She was nervous.
Yeah. You mean it doesn't change every year? Okay, so Jesus. Anyway, so on that basis, I think, Mark, you're not forgiven because you were nasty.
Yes. Well, Brother Matthew.
Do you know why this is such a great confession? Apart from the fact that I absolutely identify with Mark and his feelings on being at these plays, is that we're not laughing at Lottie, stroke Laura, stroke whatever. We're not laughing at the girl because we're laughing with her, because actually she got a great response from the crowd and they all loved it, and they're going to talk about that performance for years to come, and she's going to bask in that. So I'm really the person that we should be directing our ire at is those parents. Who needs costume changes in a nativity? They're all wearing the same thing. I've never heard of a nativity where people have to change costumes halfway through.
9 costume
Yeah, well,
changes.
absolute disgrace. So for that, obviously we're going to forgive, but it is a blinding story.
Simon Mayo's Confessions podcast.
That was your confession from the crypt. Nige making an appearance, Rebecca making another appearance. But that was a classic confession, and so many people wanted to hear that. We're going to do a Christmas confession from the crypt on each one of our December podcasts. What a complete treat.
Well, it is,
gonna
actually,
be.
yeah.
But you don't get a sticker, because if you want a sticker, you have to send in a completely new one. Right?
Yes, or get your family subscribing.
Exactly. Now, Sister Bobby, you forgave 3 this week, which takes your yearly tally to 92.5 forgiveness, 85.5 not forgiveness, catching up Matt, the softie, as he's known,
What?
who forgave everybody this week.
Yes, of course.
120.5 forgivenesses and 55.5 not forgivenesses.
Yes, quite right. We're all the same.
Does
you
the
know.
same apply in your house? You know, if someone does, if you're offended, do you automatically
Absolutely.
go, well,
Do you
let's
know
look at
what?
it this way?
Turn the other cheek. Which of us can honestly say we've never done the same?
I bet you don't say that.
No, I
If
don't.
you made it to the end of the last podcast, I asked you to tweet, "You're nothing like a sperm whale," which was a line from Bobby. And thanks to Swanee and Phil Gordon, Tony, Ed, loads more did just that, but you don't get anything for free. This week's code phrase is, "I'm just disappointed with Tom Baker." Remember to subscribe, and don't forget you can hear the whole radio show every weekday from 5 on Radio 2. And what a treat it is at 5 o'clock, don't you find, Bobby?
I do find. The thing is, once is not enough. You have to go again.
Yeah, go, what about you,
Isn't
Matt?
that, it's so true of many things in life. Yes, and we're great also.
Okay, a slightly damp end to today's podcast, but thank you very much indeed for downloading it. It's going to be even better next week.
The Confessions podcast. Go in peace.